Hey guys, welcome to this video. This is about stats and mechanics and gear, I guess. I'm really allergy wrecked right now. I'm so sorry, but so I'm gonna go over stats. This is probably something that'll probably help everybody. Not a lot of this is fully accurate, I would say. I'm trying to get it as accurate as possible. This took a long while to make, and a lot of discussions with a lot of different people and very many opinions through across Black Desert through my time playing it. But this is mostly involved into a very hard line of discussion. So first off, I'm just gonna go over like stats. In terms of stats, the most important stats is I listed it as I listed it as ignore res, all res, evasion, accuracy, AP, and DP. DP being the least valuable out of all the stats that you want to raise. Ignore res, basically it's because of how CC works. Some of this may become outdated in the future when they actually do a whole revamp of like the mechanics of stats in the game, but for now I would say this is probably applicable, and I'm trying to also make this in the sense that it'll also cover the blanket of future updates as well, which is really difficult to predict. Other than that, the other stats is your enhancement stats. Of course, depending on class, you always want this at level 5. Speed is always much more valuable than crit chance. A lot of classes have base crit chance increases and also a skill awakening buff increases. So crit chance as you get to higher levels is actually a lot less valuable than attack speed and cast speed. That also kind of coincides with the gear that is also about this video. Gear itself, Laverto itself is pretty good up until a certain point. Kazarka is definitely something you want to go after because, as I've just mentioned, as you get to higher levels, your crit just is less valuable, depending on class. It really highly dependent on class. Some classes, like Warrior, Valkyrie, and even the Dark Knight, they all have really high crit chance, and in fact it's probably most of them is 100%. So crit is actually really useless for these particular classes. Some classes need them, but you still don't really, it's not as valuable as attack speed. And as each bar of these ones go up, you get 4% increase. By that assumption alone, I'm pretty sure luck here, by every 5 bars, it'll be 20% as well. Gathering and fishing, it operates slightly differently. It's not like a 4% increase faster or whatever. It's like X seconds chopped off or whatever. So that's those are the differences. How that was measured was basically some people got some attack speed buffs that gave like plus 20%, and then they removed their attack speed 5, and then they measured the time frames of the attack cycle with attack speed 5 versus attack speed 0 with plus 20% attack speed, and that's how they figured it out. Sadly enough, that's what players have to go through to actually figure shit out in this game because it's so non-transparent. And then the next thing is to do with stun and ignore res and basically CCs. The thing I want to go over about CCs is that you can only generally tag 3 CCs on a person before they get like a miniature buff where they're immune to future status effects. The only thing that can cut through that is actually grapple resistance. Grapple resistance is more like a refresh on top of, it will override basically all kinds of CCs. But in terms of order of operation, if you want a really long combo upon somebody, you want to start off with either a stun or a stiffness first, which means that's probably the resistance you want to raise. Knockdown, some classes don't have the luxury of starting having a good initiator with stiffness or stun, so you probably have more of a knockdown or something like that, or a floating. Classes like the sorceress, they don't have really much of a stun or a stiffness, they have mostly knockdown. Other classes like Valkyrie is also very heavily catered towards bound and knockdown, and not very many stun or stiffness skills. But in terms of operation, you can never use the same CCs twice in a row. If you use a stiffness and a stiffness, they won't chain together. You have to use different CCs. So if you really want to decimate a foe that's more powerful than you, and you're in a small scale PvP environment, just like a small like duel even, stiffness or a stun first is always most preferable. These will be overridden by knockdown and bound, or knockback and floating. Knockback is particularly special. You can fit that in between stiffness and stuns, and they will override each other. but a stun or stiffness will not override a knockdown. A knockdown, once they're on the floor, or a floating, once they're on the floor, you cannot extend that CC further without either a grapple, down smash, or an air smash. Those particular extensions are very rare traits to particular classes. The Meiwa, for instance, Petal Bloom, has down smash on it. It also causes a floating or knockdown, I believe. I don't quite remember. But if you're tagged with a down smash while you're downed in a knockdown state, you get juggled on the floor one more time. Same with the air smash. If you hit somebody with an air smash while they're floating, they will also bounce once in the air before hitting the floor. And then afterwards, if you have a grapple, you can reset the on the floor status by throwing them into the floor again, which is basically an extension of your CC. Which is why I always never throw away my pre-awakening weapons skills, because they have a lot of utility compared to the awakening. Think of awakening as your damage dealer and your pre-awakening as a utility tool for CCing guys. Although it's a bit more dangerous, but I would say that a lot of people who know their full rotation is actually quite dangerous to fight. And they also utilize more of their skill awakening buffs too, which could grant plus 20 defense, plus 15 attack for PvP, for instance, or damage over time effects that you don't really need to cycle. You just need to tag it on the enemy and then be done with it. For instance, the Valkyrie, I like to sharp light and then straight into a grapple these days. My combo's gotten better. It's sharp light, grapple, promptness, straight into the lance, and then down smash with the Castigado. And then afterwards, haste charge if you can fit that in there, and then an ultimate stab if you're still locked on your target, which generally wipes out people with quite a lower amount of AP. I'm pretty sure if I had a much higher AP, they would probably die about 3/4 into the combo kind of thing. But this isn't my main, and I don't have her fully geared or anything, but that's a different story. So in terms of gear, I want to go over, this is obviously you probably want boss gear. There's about 2 different paths right now in terms of gear rotations. You can either go full boss or partial boss and partial Rokaba. The partial Rokaba is more of an evasion defensive set. You obviously won't kill people as fast and you'll be lacking the damage power, but that can be made up with other things. But obviously your end goal is boss gear, everything most of the time. It's nice to have a switch out, but if you want to be more susceptible from, if you want to prevent death more often, you probably want to make a Rokaba set along the way. Or a heap set. Chrono really does not help you out very far. It falls off the face of the earth in terms of effectiveness really quickly. One of the quest armors that you get nowadays that's now put into the game is very, very good. You probably want this as soon as you can. It's this particular roaring magical armor. You get this through doing your main story quest, and at the end of it you'll be awarded with this armor that has 60 DP, 2 slots in it, magic max HP plus 50 and accuracy plus 5. The accuracy plus 5 is huge, especially for new players. This is probably the piece that you want to keep until you actually find yourself a boss armor, or you actually make a green piece armor up to try or better, or duo even. But even then, this piece is extremely good. I would keep it around and upgrade all the other pieces instead to overshadow the incapabilities of this particular piece. The other thing that you want to go after is obviously a Beg's Gloves. Now the reason why I don't suggest a Grunal armor to start off with, it's a good set for ults and everything, but I wouldn't, if you were making a main character and you're planning to commit to one class, I highly suggest not going Grunal armor. Grunal armor really falls off fast really quick the moment you find your first piece of boss gear. Otherwise you're not going to use your boss gear basically, and it's just going to sit in your storage until you actually have 2 or 3 pieces even. Until then, Grunal armor full set is much better than the moment you get one boss gear, the whole set breaks and it's really pointless. And most people want a Beg's Gloves first in terms of priority. Once you get a Beg's Gloves, for instance, if you're wearing a full Grunal set, you replace the Beg's Gloves in because it gives you a hell amount of accuracy, which helps all your attacks land more, which means you'll do more damage in general. You lose 7 AP just from replacing that one Grunal piece with the Beg's Gloves, which is very, very detrimental and really not good. The alternatives to building towards this before you hit the boss gear is getting heave gear. Heave gear will grant you more HP, so if you have 3 pieces of heave, you'll be much more flexible with what you have to use and what you have to work with. So heave pieces is basically helm, chest, and shoe instead. And if you have 3 pieces on, you'll get plus 300 HP as opposed to a Grunno, which is plus 150 HP when you lose that 1 piece to the boss gear. Whereas with heave, you'll still retain that set and have the boss gear at that point, which is why it's much more beneficial to have heave gear. The other mix into that particular one is Terratos gear. Terratos gear is with the heave set and early on, so you go heave, helm, and chest, and then you go Terratos shoe and glove. If you're needing attack speed, because you need 2 valor gems in the glove, then you would actually go heave glove, and then you go Terratos chest and shoe, because your chest will have bonus resources and HP, I believe, slightly, and the shoe has evasion on it, which will help you just live a little longer compared to a Grunno set. The 2 gem slots isn't exactly far too worth it if you ask me for a new player, but the heave sets have 2 slots themselves, so if you actually just go full heave, you don't lose anything by the time you get your first boss gear. Instead, you'll be 300 HP stronger than people running Grunno armor and their 1 boss piece. Second boss piece you probably want is Muskin shoes. That is by far the best in slot in the shoe. There's kind of like no other alternative right now, which is kind of sad. Red nose armor is also really good. I wouldn't really disregard it. Obviously you want the tree spirit armor because plus 200 HP is much more beneficial than 5 HP recovery. The 5 HP recovery is better for just PvE or if you're running through the desert, so you don't actually burn down as fast, but even then it's really minuscule. The only reasons for getting a red nose is because it's boss armor. It attributes to the set bonus if you have 3 pieces or 4 pieces even, and you can get tree armor last kind of thing. And the DP scaling, the defense scaling with red nose is the same as tree spirit, so it's very good to still invest in a red nose as a backup. And by the time you get your tree spirit armor, you can upgrade that freely without worrying of downgrade and losing defenses. The only thing you'll be losing is a swap of 200 HP in terms of just bonuses, so don't disregard it. Red nose armor, I have a piece myself and a tree spirit armor, so it's used as a backup really. The other gear option that you have at Endgame, or Endgame so called, it's not really like, it's a pretty long journey there. I don't really expect most people to get there within like 2 weeks kind of thing. You'll get there eventually if you just keep playing. The game gives out enough resources for you to power up really quickly every month, as long as you're just logging in, getting in login rewards. So Rokaba set is the other set. Most people go like Rokaba helm and glove, so they disregard the Beg's gloves and they just go after the Muskin shoes and the chest piece, which is either red nose or tree spirit. So what happens there is that with that particular setup, you'll have a higher evasion, and then on the helm itself you add more evasion, and this is basically to counteract against people who are throwing like nothing but AP and also nothing but accuracy, and you'll maybe stand a chance once you start hitting close to about 300 DP or higher with a lot of evasion as well. So you also have to utilize a bunch of food buffs in order to make it effective, such as like Valencia meals, furniture buff, maybe, and protection stone even. But the problem there is that you'll start lacking damage, so unless you're a support healer like a wizard or a witch, then you're gonna need damage somewhere to leech off of that. You can also run like Sissel's necklace as well, which will also add to the DP, so you won't even die as hard. You'll definitely survive. It still grants an okay amount of AP, but I think an ogre ring would definitely work better there. If you're using a Kudum offhand, the Kudum offhand is also very strange. It does more damage against PvE monsters than it does to players. There's a bonus stat in there that adds a massive amount of damage against monsters, and then the Nuver or the Nuver offhand, I believe, adds hidden accuracy or something against PvP. So basically, Kudum is either your defense / PvE item, or defense for PvP, and ignore res or CC monster if you want to be like a CC lord. And Nuver is more of like your attack PvP offhand, gives all res kind of thing, and to counteract against people who run a lot of ignore res. Which leads me back to ignore res and all res. When you mouse over these stats, it says a maximum of 60% will be applied during PvP. The problem here is that for me, this is something that's unconfirmed and also just up in the air for discussion. It's not accurate, it's not factual, it's just a theory, and I feel strongly about it. The thing is that I believe that up to 60% is not enough. If you raise your resistances beyond 60 and 80, it'll still count towards people who have ignore. It is possible to get up to 60% ignore resistance if you go 2 precision gems and 2 particular CC ignores on your offhand, which is already 40%. And then if you've got a Villa buff as well, that's another 5%, so we're at 45%. And then if you use a Valencia meal, we'll be at 49% ignore res. And then if you use a high-end alchemy attack stone, it'll also be like 56 or 57%. And then if you wear a white coral belt, that'll be a full 60%, which means you'll have ignored at least about 50% of all res for each person. Oh, and then 10% more if you're using a Kudum. So you can easily go above like 60% ignore res, which means all res means nothing if 60% is the maximum and it doesn't add more from on top of it. Which is why I believe that if you raise like 85% and somebody has 40% ignore res, you'll still have 45% resistance against that particular CC. And that's my conclusions with that. It's not accurate, it's not factual, but this is how I've come to the conclusion that this is how it operates. And I don't believe it's multiplicative in terms of calculations. So if it says 10% and somebody has 60% res, that doesn't mean 6% of it is chopped off. It's actually 10% chopped off because everything else has seemed to be additive in terms of the stat gain. So when you get like plus 10 res, plus 20 res, plus 30 res, it's not like 20% plus like 60%, which is almost nothing. It'd only be like, that would only be about like 11 or 12% increase, which is nothing. So I'm pretty sure it's additive, not multiplicative. That's a really long word to say. All right, guys. So that's kind of in terms of offhand gears or whatever. Rosar weapons and Rosar offhands are definitely worth getting. I highly recommend them because their base AP is higher than all the other green weapons. And Rosar offhand is it's good for defense. Otherwise, you would want to go with AP if you just need damage up until you have boss gear, which is obviously a long chase. The sealed offhands that you get from the quest as well is also very good. For instance, the ornamental knot of sealed magical power here is 7 to 9 AP and 18 DP. This is about as good as like almost a plus 14 or plus 15 defense offhand. And it has 2 slots and it gives accuracy increase. Very useful for newbies and new players. Highly helpful up until that point. But definitely Grunal armor is not something I would commit to early on. That AP plus 5 really doesn't help you the moment you find your Beg's gloves, because it just falls off the face of the earth. Otherwise, you have a boss gear just sitting in storage doing nothing. And that's even more terrible if you ask me. Especially if it's a Beg's gloves and you need it to grind or just kill mobs faster in general. Anyways, I'm going to go succumb to my bed because these allergies are killing me. Thanks so much for watching and dealing with me. If not, until then, bye bye for now.